Well, Preston, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lynch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
Well, I love what you're doing. And we had a great conversation before we got on this morning about this new season of life for you. Tell me about your spiritual roots and where this whole spiritual journey for you even began.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mike, and an honor to be with you and with the listeners this morning. My spiritual journey started when I was in between 7th and 8th grade, actually, so 40 something years ago. And I was invited by a friend named Brian in junior high to come to a youth group there in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I grew up. And I remember going with a T-shirt. I was gonna be kind of a rebel. I'm going to a church. I have a Grateful Dead type T-shirt on, and kind of giving the fist kind of thing. And but then I heard the gospel and I saw how these people interacted with one another. And I remember just raising my hand one day and praying that prayer and putting my faith in the Lord and surrendering my life to Him at a young age. Let's fast forward way then. So that was 1980, and let's go 25 years advance in 2005. Now remember, I told you I surrendered my life in 1980. I didn't surrender my career to the Lord until 2005. There was a breaking point, a tipping point for me then. A lot of tough circumstances at work, and we can talk about that a little bit later if you'd like to, or if you can, however you want to do that. But there was a tipping point there for me where I realized that I was living life under my own power. I was not actually surrendered to the Lord. Was I reading the Bible? Sure. Was I being a good father and a good dad? I maybe think so. Probably not as good as I probably could have been. Was I doing okay at work? Not as well as I wanted to be. So I think I was living life under my own power, my own authority. And at that tipping point, that breaking point that happened to me, where I surrendered everything to the Lord, I had people quit on me at work. I had some tough circumstances. And I finally just got to the end of my rope and I said, Lord, I don't get what's going on. You've put this leadership bent in me and I'm screwing it up. And I said, hey, I can't do this on my own. So I give all of this to you. I'm going to surrender my career, my job. Not sure where you're going to take this. And man, I tell you what, Mike, from that point on, it wasn't a microwave moment. It didn't just a light switch didn't happen. But it's kind of like I likened it. And I talked to a former pastor of mine up in Knoxville, Tennessee. And Rick was telling me that sometimes when you get in those circumstances, it's like you have a football injury or a baseball injury or whatnot. And it's kind of severe. Maybe you've torn your ACL or something like that. But you have to get surgery and then go into rehab for a while before you get back out on the field. And that's really what the Lord did with me during that time frame. And some people might say sanctification is the theological term behind that and the process behind it. But He worked in me and through me and started doing some just incredible things. And now I'm on the other side of that and recently retired from the Coca-Cola company after a 20+ year career. Did a lot of great, exciting things there at the company and felt very blessed and fortunate to be part of that. But now I'm on the other side and enjoying life that way and trying to take the things that I've learned and share not only my faith with people on the other side of that, but how actually you apply your faith in the workplace.
I love that. And I want to dig in a little bit on that 1980 to 2005, because during that time you were doing the right things and you were accomplishing things in career component things. As you begin to build your career, why does it make it even harder to come to a point of surrender? I think surrender when we're 22 and we're just starting, but when you're in mid-career, you're in mid-stride, building your life, why does surrender get even harder in our late 20s, 30s, and 40s?
It became about me. There were the accolades. I hate to say this. I tell people, if people have read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, one of my love languages actually is words of affirmation. So if you give me words of affirmation, it puffs me up. I pursued the awards, hit the goals, did all those things, and from a performance perspective, I was nailing it. To be quite frank with you. When I was with Hershey Foods, won a couple of national awards. When I was with Coke, won awards, recognition, and all different things around that, being promoted, salary being bumped up. I'm like, yeah, things are going well. But Mike, there was an incongruence in me, this tension between who I was on Sunday and who I was the rest of the week. And, I talked to my wife, Carla, who I've been blessed. And out kicked my coverage, if you will,
Yep.
on that. And she told me one day, she goes, Preston, I don't know why you're struggling at work. If you just treated people at work the way you treat us here at home, you'd be fine. And that was kind of a light bulb that went off. I was like, why do I not care about people? It's not that I didn't care about people. I just didn't know how to. And so that was an eye-opening moment for me. And so you asked the question, Mike, why is surrender so hard? It's because I think when you start to taste success and you start to think about that it's something that you are creating, you are generating. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of successful people out there. But it's just something personally the Lord did in me, saying, hey, this isn't what it's all about. And I got further and further and further away from him. And it's kind of like I lost my first love. I was so focused on performance. I shared this Tuesday morning when I was at a fundraiser event in Nashville. And I felt like my relationship during that time frame was more like an employee that was waiting on his manager to come in and give me a performance appraisal and drop the hammer. And so I was always trying to do what I could, stay in front of things, and always felt like if I performed well, not only spiritually but also at work, then I would be okay. And I learned that that's not enough. It would never be enough. And so that's where the surrender came in, and the breaking through circumstances, and like I just explained, and that's where I just bowed and said, hey, Lord, this is yours.
Yeah. So how long, I know you said it wasn't a light bulb moment. It wasn't oh yeah, tomorrow everything's okay. Was there somebody you saw in the marketplace that you went, that's what I want to be? That is a picture of how I want my life to look. Or do you say, man, I just had to learn it as I went and felt like I was alone sometimes?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of a wilderness type time as you go through that. But again, I use the word tipping point. A milestone in my life was getting involved in a group called CLC. It's called Christ-led Communities now. It used to be called Christian Leadership Concepts, started by Hal Haddon out of Nashville, and a guy named David Bianconi was my facilitator. And that was about 2008. So remember, I told you I surrendered my career to God in 2005. It wasn't until 2008 when I actually got involved in a 2-year really in-depth discipleship program that showed me first what it looks like to be a man after God's own heart. And then once you're pursuing him and he in relationship and fellowship and friendship with the Lord, then those things like business, leadership, everything else flows after that. So that was a transformational piece for me. I shared on Tuesday too. It's kind of funny, Mike. I hope your listeners might have listened or read the book. I'm sorry, Good to Great.
Yep.
If you've read that book, Good to Great by Jim Collins, Jim and his students, the idea here is that how did organizations experience extraordinary results after they had floated along under average results, if you will. And that black box in there, they said leaders had a transformation, and then something happened in them, and then the organization transformed and took off on that. And I told the group on Tuesday, what does that black box have to do with our spiritual lives? Well, for me, it had everything to do with that. And Jim Collins said it's a little bit of a mystery. He didn't tell people about how to transform, the 10 steps of transformation. He just observed that it happened. And I told the crowd, hey, it's not a mystery that if we surrender our lives to Christ, he will work in us and through us. He's going to shape that Christ-like character and then put us in places of influence where we can shape the world on his behalf. And so that was that strip between 2005, 2008 through 10, 11. Then we got transferred to Atlanta from Knoxville. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. The last thing I'd end with is this on this point, is this. If you worked with Preston Poore for the first 10 years at Coca-Cola, if you worked with me then, you'd probably say I was a jerk. Quite frank. I was didn't care about what was in my wake, more cared about performance, my promotion. If you worked for me, I was trying to make you more like me. Through that black box, that second 10 years, I would hope that people would say that I was instead of a burden to work with, I was a blessing to work with. And why is that? It's because I leaned in and loved people. It doesn't mean I was hugging them all the time and all that kind of stuff, but I was encouraging them, helping them achieve their goals, helping to develop them, helping them to succeed, and then ultimately the team succeeded. So it was really just a heart. People talk about mindset. It was a heart change that took place in me.
Aren't you glad you did that though? How much different would you feel now stepping out of your career to begin to launch a new career in your mid-50s How much different would you feel if you went, yeah, I wish I could go back to the last 10 and redo them, and you didn't get a chance to transform that? I wonder how differently you'd feel right now about what you're setting out to do.
You know, I've asked people these questions. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And I would certainly do a lot of things differently, but I do believe in God's providence. It's one of the things I learned when I read Oswald Chambers' My Utmost for His Highest, and he believes that God engineers all circumstances. And I think there was a reason I went through all of that, because I'm on the other side now and I can talk about a transformation. I can talk to the fact that I never really had a role model at work. The role models I had were actually at church and CLC, and what they helped me do is to come back and how do I apply that faith at work. Barna did a study, Mike, I don't know if you're aware of this, it's called Christians at Work. And they found that they did a study, they had about 1,500 people that they surveyed, and believers, their faith mattered to them on some level. And they asked them about living out their faith in the workplace. And they put them into 3 buckets. And 28% they found were quote unquote integrators, meaning that they were living out their faith. They were a redemptive influence in the workplace. They were satisfied personally, professionally. They were using their talents to glorify God and their skills and talents and abilities. That means the other 72% weren't and don't know how to do that. And so I don't think I think it's very common not to have a spiritual role model in the workplace. Why is that? I don't know. We can talk about that a little bit. I scratch my head sometimes on it. I can tell you my perspective, but I think sometimes it has to do with shame, feeling embarrassed, feeling like, my faith is not valuable in the workplace. How will people react around me? How will they treat me differently? And so I think there's a lot of different pieces that play into that about why people don't do that. But I do want to mention that I'll be quiet here in just a second, but I think this is so important to make this point, is that discipleship, becoming like Christ and being a disciple of Christ, that's the beginning point for these things. And so that 72%, you have to build up and shore up or disciple them, and then give them a positive role model that will model the way in the workplace. And then once that happens, then they can go in and influence in the workplace around them.
And I told you this before we started. This is the whole point of this podcast, is for people to see God put me where He put me. He put me in the spaces and places He did for a reason bigger than me. What do you think could happen if people got it? If people went, am I qualified? Well, probably not. Will I ever know enough? Probably not. Will there ever be a perfect time? Probably not. But God thinks I can. He's equipped me, and I can do this. What do you think could change in the marketplace and in our world if that 72% who say they have a faith and they have something behind it, what do you think could change if they began to live that out?
I think that you would have people that live more fulfilled personal and professional lives. They really would. If they go down this path, it's kind of funny. If you look at a statistics, a bell curve, and I always talk about tight and to the right. Imagine if you had that 28% there were integrators in the faith, and just move that to 29 or 30. That would have an exponential impact in the workplace. And one thing I talk to Christian leaders about is this concept of engagement. Are you familiar with engagement?
Decently, but probably not to the level you've got it.
Yeah, I was blessed with the opportunity to lead a couple of engagement teams at the Coca-Cola company. And engagement, the definition of business engagement is, and this is the operating definition I use, is the discretionary effort somebody's willing to put forth based on their relationship with their direct manager and or the workplace. So that discretionary effort is so important. And so if you're a believer that you are leaning into people with your direct people, and that you're encouraging them, building them up, helping them achieve things in their career, taking away the fear out of the workplace, that creates people that will innovate. They'll take risks. They'll come up with great ideas. They'll be more productive. They'll be happier workers. It's funny, if you look at Gallup, I don't know if you're familiar with the Gallup polling organization, but one of the things that they always talk about is the level of engagement. And the polls tell us year after year that between 30 and 35% of people in the United States are engaged. That's it. Think about it. So again, you go back to a number that's 70%, and actually 25% are right around there are actively disengaged, meaning that they are ticked off about their boss and their work environment, and they are trying to mess things up at work, or they're this quote unquote, what's the popular phrase right now, or it was quiet quitting.
Yep.
And what does that mean? That's just another translation that people have given up at work. They've lost morale. They've lost motivation. And I tie all that back to that manager-employee relationship. So if you're a believer and the Lord has changed in you and working in you and through you, and the fruit of the Holy Spirit, one of they talk about joy. If there's a joy in your life, that joy will spill over into other lives through maybe encouragement. And I talk about that in the book, or how do you encourage people? What's the end result of that? And why do you do that? It's because you want to lift them up and feel great about what they're doing. Even if they're not a believer, you're still a team member. That human need to be encouraged, to have hope out there. And I think that's something we can provide. And I think that's the Lord working in us first and then through us in the workplace.
I totally agree with you. And this new book, everybody, Discipled Leader, is so good. And what I love about it is you've been on the inside of where everybody who's listening to this is. That you've been in the boardrooms, you've been in the meetings, you've been on the planes, you've been in the hotel rooms, you've worked alongside people that don't believe like you believe, but yet we're called to love and we're called to lead them. And you broke this discipled leader down into some really chewy categories. And that's what it's very, it's something that's easy to process and easy to go through. And you talked about seek. As a disciple, invest time with God. As a leader, seek God when making decisions. And you shared a great story about a job with a hunter that Carla didn't have a peace about, and why that should have been a red flag to you. Your wife doesn't have a peace, but you were old, Preston. You sort of plowed through it. Unpack that a little bit. It's a great story.
Yeah, thanks. I always had this the bent for developing others and public speaking and things like that, just kind of a gift and talent. And I got enamored with this guy over in Birmingham. And wow, I tell you what, he was all that I ever wanted to be. He had his own radio show. He owned a training organization in that city. Went to work for him. The fun thing is that I went through a sales course with him. So he was my mentor through that. And there was a transformation for me. I was probably the worst salesperson at Ralston Purina before I took that. And then I got off the rank selling dog food, which was all fun. But I got through that. And this individual helped me reach my potential and helped me succeed. And then he actually asked me to come work for him. And, he had the car, he had the country club membership, all the things, the worldly things that you would aspire to. And I was attracted to it, to be quite frank with you. And I remember the night sitting on top of the Harbor Plaza, which is one of the bigger buildings in Birmingham. It's top of the bank up there. And he was whining, and he and his wife were whining and dining us. So I remember looking out over the skyline and say, hey, drinking a glass of wine, and it's not a nice steak. People around me, everybody's dressed up. I feel good about that. This is what I want. I love this. And I'll never forget getting down there. I was ready to go. The guy was making the offer and everything, and got down in my car. And I started telling Carla how excited I was. And she looked over at me and said, Press, I don't think this is the right thing for us. I don't think you ought to do it. Well, I listened to her. No, I didn't. I did not listen to her at all, Mike. I had my own resolve. Again, I go back to the pre-tipping point for me in my life. And I was pursuing that gold that I found out didn't glitter. And or was not gold. What's that phrase that says everything that glitters is not gold type thing. But ultimately, what happened in that whole piece was I made a decision to go forth in that organization. I got ahead of God. I didn't. Was I doing quiet times and reading the Bible? Maybe my eyes were glancing over the Word. Was I praying about it? Yeah, Lord, this is kind of what I want to do. I want your blessing on it. And I made the choice to go. And you know what? Be honest with you, that first year, Mike, we were rocking and rolling. I came in on a salary, bonus, commission. I was all over the city of Birmingham making talks, speeches, enrolling people in courses, profile going up, people getting to know who I was. It felt good, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. I
Mm.
share in the book, there was this time where what I call my Black October. If people are familiar with 1987, when the stock market went down, people lost a lot of money. But my manager and the owner of the business, the whole business, small business, had a very rough couple months. And so he took me off of that bonus salary and commission and put me on a draw.
Mm.
And I don't know if most people are familiar with what a draw is. There's nothing wrong with the draw for the right person, but I was with a young family and it was just a tough time. I struggled with that and I was underwater for a long time. That put all kinds of pressures on there. And that was a breaking point for me. And again, I keep getting into these situations where I'm like, okay, I'm in the foxhole now, God, help me. I'm in the foxhole now, God, help
Yep.
me. And it's just
Yep.
these repetitive patterns that I had going on it. And it's because I wasn't pursuing him. I was pursuing what I wanted. And so I detail that story in the book to say, hey, this is a bad decision. I made a series of bad decisions that led to where I was, but I did make one good decision in that. I surrendered.
Mm.
And I said, Lord, help me. I need your help on this. And he did. He was faithful, provided a way out, provided a way for my family. And that's where I started moving into consumer products, Ralston Pure and Hershey, and then ending with Coca-Cola.
So you take that scenario,
Mhm.
and then you've just walked through a great change. You've walked away from a career to begin literally hang a new shingle,
Mhm.
and I'm going to remake. How did Seek look different this time than it did last time as you stepped out into this new venture, into this new unknown, and you marched off the map? How did you process things and seek wisdom differently?
Yeah, so there's a few things I've done, I think maybe differently. One is the Bible tells us to pray for wisdom.
Mm.
And so I prayed for wisdom, and wisdom really is just knowledge and experience combined with judgment, good judgment, and the application of those things. And so I really was pursuing God, and I started this off ramp, after leaving Coca-Cola, which I just left here recently, about 5 or 6 years ago. I used my discretionary time to figure out, okay, what does this look like? How do I develop other talents, the current talent, skills, and abilities, but other things like how do you publish a book? How do you do a podcast? How do you write blogs? How do you set up a website? How do you build a platform? Man, that's my first rodeo on all that stuff. But there were fun things. One of the attributes I loved at the Coca-Cola company said that they wanted everybody to have was to be curious.
Mm.
And so I took that and I was curious about a lot of things to help that. But in seeking, Mike, it was this intentional, I don't want to get in front of God. I don't.
Mm.
I don't want to get in front of God. Now, was I perfect at that? Absolutely not. I'll give you a quick story. My book, it took me 10 years to write. I've been through 2 agents, 3 editors. I was rejected by probably 30 different agents to take the book. 50 different publishing houses said no. And I was talking to my current agent, and I've been praying about my book. I said, Lord, why did you have me write this? Why are we not getting published traditionally and all that? Agent calls and says, okay, I think here's our next step. Let's go with a hybrid publisher. What that means is that you pay somebody to publish
Yep.
your book for you, right? And then you do the marketing, but they'll get you out in the stores. So for the right person at the right time, somebody might need that. And a lot of people do it. It just ended up, I'll share with you why in here a second, was not the right thing for me. So anyway, Mike, I go ahead and my literary agent says, let's do this. And I said, okay, I'll pay the money. We did the interview with the company. I wrote the check, sent it in to him. Guess what happened on the next Monday? I got an email from my agent, and it was a forward. And all that said in the email from my agent said, this throws a wrench in things. And down below that was my current publisher saying, hey, we want to talk to Preston. We want to sign him. Now, a traditional publishing piece is awesome because they will publish your book. They'll get it out there in distribution. They'll market with you and
Yep.
for you, publicity, do all kinds of great things on it. And that's what I've been hoping and praying for. But I told you that I didn't want to get ahead of God, and I've been praying over these things.
Yep.
I made a decision. I said I had the resources in my own power. Let's go do it. Then God comes back on Monday and says, no, wait a second, Press. I want you to go this route.
Mm.
And so I had to go back. I lost some money in the deal and all that, but I knew that if I got out of that and moved forward, it was just a God intervention thing. But it was, again, Preston getting ahead of
Yep.
God. And so I'm not perfect at it, But what it's doing in me, and still being, I guess, relatively young, I'm still learning, Mike. I haven't got all this figured out.
That's
I
right.
still don't. Even though I'm retired from a Fortune 500 company, even though I'm doing other things, I still have to discipline myself and submit myself to the Lord and say, hey, what do you want?
Yeah.
Where are we going with this? And I'm attuned to that sometimes, and other times I'm really not.
You know what I love about that? Then I just left a leadership group this morning. What I love about that is when we seek wisdom and we seek out others and we seek godly wisdom, it grows humility in our lives. And humility is such a great um, picture for people to go, oh, so that's what being a Christ follower looks like, you know? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you don't seek, you will ever be humble because you think you know everything.
Yeah, the humility is a boy, what a big topic and big subject to chat about. What happened with me in the humility on that is I realized that I needed a circle of people around me, an inner
Mm.
circle, that would not only hold me accountable, but help provide advice, direction, thoughts. So I've done a few things. I'm part of an accountability group, small circle or small group thing. But the other thing I instituted about a year and a half ago, which I've really enjoyed, was creating this thing called a personal advisory board. And so I've solicited. I had 6 people on there originally, and they're all walks of life. And the idea is this: as I was launching my book, I didn't want to become. I don't want to become, and that's my personality. I think I mentioned that earlier. I like the affirmation.
Yep.
I want to pursue fame, be recognized and all things. And I knew that was not right for me. So I needed some people in my life to help me keep those guardrails in place. I solicited people that are on the board that have been where I want to go.
Yeah.
So
That's
they have
good.
experience in that. Just real quick, I got a guy that was a mentor of mine at Coke, and he is a former Washington Redskin, played for Joe Gibbs, and has a Super Bowl ring. I talk to him once a quarter. I talk to all of them for once a quarter for board things. I have my former pastor from Fellowship Church up in Knoxville that's on the board. I have another guy that's a consultant in healthcare that I did the CLC program with, Christian Leadership Concepts, or Christ-led Communities now. I've got 3 women on the board now, which is really, really good. I value the diverse thinking. I think a lot of times as men, there are some things we need to keep our guardrails around, but man, there's some really talented female women leaders in the marketplace. And so I've got one, Dawn, she's fantastic, Coca-Cola former executive that's gone out and has published a book, coaching, speaking, training, doing D&I for some companies in Atlanta. That's good stuff. I have another young lady up in Wisconsin that's on the board that has done this book publishing thing, and she's been supportive along the way. And another that was at Coke that was a confidant of mine that I've pulled in. So got a number of people. And what I do, Mike, just real quick on this to let people know, that personal advisory board, you may have seen that. You may have read it in the Wall Street Journal. You may have seen it in Career Planning. It's real.
Yeah.
And I can send them a note about what's going on. And then I sit down with them individually for 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes once a quarter. And they all bring me a certain perspective. They ask me questions, all from their point of view. And it's just awesome to have a tribe walking with you through that are interested in you, will pour into you for that.
In the beautiful part, and if we ever get it, you're able to lean into wisdom you could never get any other way. And you're able to lean into their life experiences, what they've seen, and it's all accessible if we will humble ourselves and go, okay, I need to ask this. I need to say this to somebody. You also say, and you give it, and let me say this too, in the chapter, you give a great grid on deciding that's really, really good that people will love. But one of the other things you say a discipled leader does is they involve others, and they love. These leaders they love God and love others with all they've got. And as a leader, they give up without giving up. Talk to me about how indispensable love is to a discipled leader as they lead.
There's a Christian singer And I think his name was Don Francisco. I mean, that
Mm,
nobody's going to remember
mm.
that name,
Oh
but Don
God, I
Francisco
remember
back
that
in the day,
name. Holy moly.
great stuff. But I remember one of the lines he that really started forming my theology and understanding of the Lord. He said, love is not a feeling; it's an act of your word.
Mm-hmm.
It's an action. Bob Goff says, is an author. He says, love does.
Yep.
One of the most, I think it's so interesting, Mike, that if you look at 1 Corinthians 4, what is it, 13, 4-8, that love passage is typically only read at weddings.
That's right.
Only read at weddings. What if we went back and looked at that and said, here's what love is. Love is patient. It is kind. One that it's in there that hits me is love's not irritable. Man, Preston Poore can be one of the most irritable guys in the world. But Paul paints this picture of what love is and can be. And so the question is, do I have the ability, those attributes? Am I leaning in? Is the Lord working in me and through me to love other people? One of the exercises I mentioned in the book about love toward other people on that is to take that passage and where it says love, take the word love out and put your first name in
That's
there.
right. It's good.
Are you doing those things? And that'll start to open up your eyes a little bit. And so loving others and sacrificing what I want to help other people, as I mentioned, help them in their career, help them develop, help them be successful, encourage them, help them reach their potential. That's how you love people in the workplace. You really do.
And you never go wrong doing that. If you fail at that, you really never fail, do you?
You don't, but I also want to, I think this might be a good time. This is something that's on my heart too. Mike, and I don't know if your listeners have experienced this. You may have had a believer in the workplace that was a really good people person, did some of these things I'm mentioning, but they didn't deliver results.
That's right. That's a good
And
word.
I've seen that case more often, that if you don't deliver results and you do have that faith, God's working in something there, but they're typically not around very long, or they lose credibility in the workplace and those things. And so it's so important to help deliver those results, but the question is not what you're doing, it's how you do it. It's not what you're doing, it's how you do it. And that's one of those things that came to me at Coke is right. When they do their reviews every year, it was like, it wasn't necessarily what you accomplished, though we want you to help us get to those goals. It's the stories you had to tell about how I did that. And the how people will always remember how you treated them, not necessarily what you did together. That's an old story from, I think, James Dobson from Focus on the Family years ago. I remember hearing him just abbreviated story. He goes into his high school and he sees or it was college, high school, whatever, and he sees his tennis trophies. He was a tennis player and went there for a reunion, something like that. And he saw that they were cleaning out the display case where those trophies were, and his trophy was in the trash can, right? He accomplished something. Nobody really remembered that necessarily. His trophy was in the trash can, but I venture to bet they probably remember James Dobson and probably the way he treated people against that. So
I love that. So let me ask you this question. How do we love as a discipled leader, but also have to deliver some hard things sometimes? Sometimes the best thing for somebody is it's not going to work here. How do we balance that love for them as people, but also the duty we have? And I love that you hit on that. I think you're right on it. And I think that's a struggle, because we're like, okay, is that loving to put somebody on a 90-day or to move somebody on or to have a very tough coaching conversation with them? How do you balance that as a discipled leader?
You have dignity and respect for that individual. Dignity and respect. You value them and you respect them. Another story, I in a bad decision I made. Again, I've made a bunch of bad decisions. So I think that's how you get wisdom sometimes. You walk through these things and you learn from them. But I needed to hire somebody up in the New England market. And there weren't many candidates, and actually nobody applying for the job. And so there was somebody that was working for our bottling partner up there in another group. And I asked around, everybody told me not to hire that individual. Guess what I did? I hired that individual. Now, that individual, over time, I thought, Mike, that I could shape, form, get this person on the right path. Not trying to make them me, but I felt like that they had the raw materials. over a year's time frame, the bottling partner kept calling me saying, hey, we're not getting from this individual what we need, they're not performing to our level of expectation. And then things started falling on me. And so I started having to have these conversations with that individual. I'm going to pause for a minute. This phrase comes to mind: feedback is a gift. Have you heard that before?
I have.
Yeah, I don't like that. Honestly, this might be heresy to people listening on the phone. I think there's value in feedback. I think there's value in honest, transparent conversations about performance. But I've had feedback used so many times against me in a situation where somebody was trying to strike back or trying to. I remember a manager closing their office door when I was sitting there with them, and the individual looked at me and says, "I don't want you to say a word. Here's what I think, and here's what you've done, and I want you to go correct this. Now get out of here," kind of thing. Like that. Was there dignity and respect in that conversation? I might have been wrong in some of that stuff, but it goes back to the how we treat other people. To tie a loose end on that story about the individual that I hired, you know, I had to put her on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. And to have somebody cry on the other end of the phone while you're doing that, and to actually manage them out of the system, to move them on to another role or another opportunity, it's very, very hard. And but you have to make those decisions sometime. I made a bad decision, again, had to work through all of that, and then had to make the decision aligned with my leadership that was the right decision. That individual wasn't a great fit for that role. And so let's help that individual find something else, which that individual actually did inside the company, and I think ultimately left. But those are hard things. So it shouldn't just because we're well, just because we're Christians, and also I had somebody else to tell me that good human relations doesn't mean you just let people run over you. In circumstances like that, you have to know where people are, their performance. Do your very best to help them achieve the things they need to. If they're not, then that's where you consider, is this the right fit for us? And that's the old Jim Collins: get the right people on the bus. And that individual was not right fit, and I had to make that decision and had some tough conversations.
I remember years ago with the work I did with the Falcons, I had a chaplain there, James Trapp would tell me, that's a long story, but he always said, I sit down with the coaches the night before the final cuts. And he said they grieve over cutting these kids because a lot of them, that is all they have. And he reminds them through a story about how he came to know Christ. You're not their God. You're just their coach.
That's
and
right.
you doing that might be the most loving thing you could do, is getting them where they need to be. And as a disciple leader, you know, you've been praying for them, you've been loving them, you've been leading them and pouring into them. There's a piece that comes, though, I thought was really, really good. You talked about a disciple leader believes, they take God at his word, and as a leader, that causes them to cultivate God confidence. How did you learn through the years to take God at his word, that he truly isn't going to we'll just take that last scenario. He's not going to leave these people out on an island by themselves. He's not forgotten them just because they don't work with you. What was the process for you, Preston, learning to take God at his word through the years?
Again, it goes back to my surrendering and trying God. Not trying God in a wrong way. It was like, okay, Lord, I'm going to hand this over to you. I pray that you lead me in the right direction. You show me what to do. Will you intervene somewhere? Those are things that I can't do. He knows so much more than I do. And so it was really a journey of faith for me. And it's that releasing and letting go and letting God do things in my life. You know, Jesus is not a genie. He's not a genie. I'm not going to him with my 3 wishes and asking him, hey, here are the 3 things I want. It's more of I want the listener to understand, from my perspective, this discipleship thing we're talking about is about a relationship and about a fellowship. And you know, when Jesus says, and I read that this morning, I think I was in, forget which gospel I was in, but I was reading about Jesus washing feet and saying, hey, just as I've done to you, you do to others, and other things about being a friend of his. You know, friend. You know, how can I be a friend to the Lord, and how can he be a friend to me? So those are some things I think, Mike, as you go through that and understanding about how do you grow that God confidence, it's a building of faith. And it's funny, I remember reading a quote from Mother Teresa. She said something to the effect, I'll probably butcher this, but check me on it. She said something to the effect that if God showed us exactly what was going to happen, we wouldn't need faith.
That's right.
We wouldn't need faith. If there was absolute clarity, we wouldn't need that at all. And so, it's an adventure. That's the fun part on this whole thing. That's the kind of my mindset. Okay, God, what are we doing today? Or where are we going? Who are we going to see? What are the opportunities ahead of me? And Lord, just use me. And I don't know what every day looks like. I still have a vision. I still have a plan, but it's all done under His submission, His authority, leaning in Him, hoping and knowing that He will strengthen me if I trust Him.
How contagious is that God confidence, not only to the people you lead, but even in your own family, as your kids have watched you right where you're at right now? I mean, you're taking a step of faith into something you feel like God's called you to do. How contagious has that been to those around you?
So recently retiring at the Coca-Cola company, I was so humbled, Mike, and honored. I had roughly 25 people in a room there at the Coca-Cola building in Plum Street Cafe, which is a restaurant that they've created there in the middle of the headquarters. And after reception and things like that, everybody gathered around me in a big circle, and my family was there. So my wife, Carla, my son, Benton, and my daughter, Caroline, are all there. And everybody had a chance to go around and share a perspective. And it was also fun because I had a chance to pour it back into them. It wasn't about me just soaking all up and saying, hey, I'm retiring. This is my moment. It was like, okay, I want to affirm them as well. But the one common denominator, common theme that happened in all that was that, Preston, we saw you live out your faith in the workplace, and we saw how you put your family first, looking at your kids and your wife and amazing family that you have. Thank you for that. I had one of my former guy who used to work with me and a peer look at my family and say, thank you for sharing Preston with us. They wouldn't have said that early on, but I think in the second half right of my career that happened. Now, why did I take you down that path? Because my kids, more valuable than anything, Mike, they got a chance to hear that. And my hope and prayer for them is that they are, from a legacy perspective, that they get that if we trust the Lord, if our relationship is about Him and not necessarily the success that the world brings, what do we do significantly and how do we lean into Him? God, there's just so much in that, so much value, so much something so much worthwhile, purpose, meaning, calling, all those things that come out of it. So I share that with you because as my God confidence grew over time, not only the people around work see it, they expressed it back to me. My kids, I know, hopefully they saw the transformation happening. My wife did as well. Still not perfect. Still got a long, long way to go. But for them to hear that affirmation was like, you gotta have a chance where these two worlds crossed and overlapped for a little bit. And they heard some things about Dad that they might be inspired by. And I love that.